In present day, at any given time, if you search, you'll find many, many clinical trials that are in development, that are recruiting, that have recently closed, that have just presented results, and in turn are being used to develop new clinical trials. It's an ongoing cycle as we strive to cure diseases, find adequate treatments and interventions for behaviors that are detrimental to our own health. But long before today, in the era of the randomized controlled clinical trial with fancy adaptive designs, we started with simple comparisons all the way back in BC, the 1500s, 16s, 17s, 18s, 1900s, and up to today. Let's look at the earliest indications of the very early forms of clinical research. So the first evidences of research actually go back to 605 BC and perhaps even earlier, if the history had been recorded. We have King Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel, and Hippocrates, all that have recorded evidence of research. As far back as the Bible, King Nebuchadnezzar II ordered the children of royal blood to eat only meat and wine for 3 years. Daniel requested that he and 3 other children be allowed to eat only bread and water. So this was a self-selection or an observational study, as you would think of it today, but there are 2 clear groups here. We have a group eating meat and wine, and we have a group eating only bread and water. Daniel and the 3 children were noticeably healthier and more vivacious than those who had had a wine and meat diet. So if you think all the way up to today, to thinking about how we say eat as little meat as possible, and wine does have some health benefits, but only in moderation, it seems like Daniel was on the right track for all of our nutritional studies that are underway today. Hippocrates, in a similar time frame, stated, "I will use treatment to help the sick according to my ability and judgment, but never with a view to injury and wrongdoing. In whatsoever houses I enter, I will enter to help the sick, and I will abstain from all intentional wrongdoing and harm, especially from abusing the bodies of man or woman, bond or free." So the modern interpretation, of course, for medical students or for physicians is first, do no harm. That's actually not anywhere in the Hippocratic Oath. As you can see, it is, I will abstain from all intentional wrongdoing and harm. That's a rather long statement to make. But what's key here is looking at the abusing the bodies of man or woman, bond or free. So if you're getting ready to start a clinical trial, there are rules in place about being able to study prisoners. Even so much as people are on house arrest or wearing ankle bracelets, they cannot be enrolled in clinical trials. Their consent is not deemed to be freely given. So this idea stems from a very long time ago in terms of how to help people. And if you even look in here in the statements of abstaining from intentional wrongdoing and harm and abusing the bodies of man, woman, bond, or free, those are the impetus for our IRB, for our safety boards that look at the risks versus benefits, that you should not intentionally be hurting someone in order to see if you can make them better. But also Hippocrates said, "I will not use the knife, not even verily on sufferers from stone, but I will give place to such as are craftsmen therein." This was actually interpreted as no human dissection. The meaning actually isn't very clear. I will give place to such as craftsmen therein, so referring to, say, surgeons at the very early stages. But it was widely interpreted that that meant that no one could do human dissection, which, of course, after people have passed away, the donation of bodies to science has been incredibly helpful in propelling forward the studies of anatomy. And so this was halted until the 1300s, no human dissection. So all that was learned from medicine was what could be observed as people were alive, or from the body when they passed away, but not in a dissected or cadaver. And that carried all the way up until the 1300s when dissection was allowed or resumed. And now we have the 1500s where we have some great advancement in human studies. So we go back to Leonardo da Vinci, Andreas Vesalius, and Ambrose Paré in the 1500s, of course, all European. So that brings us to the late 1400s, where Leonardo da Vinci illustrates his famous drawings, which still today are used quite widely within the scientific and medical community. In 1507, Da Vinci began in earnest at the University of Pavia. Bodies of executed criminals here were allowed to be dissected. So this sort of flies in the face a little bit of the Hippocrates statement about bond or free. But there was debate at the time in the early 1500s that criminals had rights or needed to ask anybody for those permissions. So they used criminals that had been executed by the prison to be dissected. About the same time as the dissections in 1539, Andreas Vesalius, the father of modern anatomy in 1543, published a series of woodcuts of human dissections. So as they were dissecting, they then took basically or cut a mold out of wood. Basically, someone chiseled the cuts of the dissection so that people could look at them without having to re-dissect. So a much earlier concept of medical illustration, but done in woodcuts. And again, this allowed people to study the anatomy of humans without actual dissection. In 1537, we have Paré and wound care. This was actually an unintentional clinical trial on battlefield soldiers. So he was a surgeon. Traditionally, heated oil had been used to treat wounds. That seems that it would be incredibly painful. But there wasn't actually enough oil to go around in wartime because there were so many injuries and they were using so much of it. Paré is quoted as saying, "My oil lacked, and I was constrained to apply in its place a digestive made of yolk of eggs, oil of roses, and ouch, turpentine." But you can imagine the medicinal qualities of something with a scent such as turpentine. They mixed it with roses and yolks of eggs and placed it over wounds. After one night to those applied, the digestive medicament, as it was called, feeling but little pain, their wounds neither swollen nor inflamed, and having slept through the night. The others, the boiling oil, were feverish with much pain and swelling about their wounds. So it seems in his comparative observation, those who had been given the new treatment or the new intervention were doing or performing better than those who'd been given the standard heated oil. And that is sort of where things kind of stayed for a while in the mid-1500s. There were not a lot of recorded advances there. What we will look at next is the 1700s and 1800s, where procedures for research begin to be formalized.